Hello, and welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. This is a podcast that explores topics relevant and related to psychedelic culture, medicine, spirituality, and research, and always with the underlying inquiry of how might we work with and through our psychedelic experiences to become better people, not just for ourselves, but for all those with whom we are nested in relationship, presently and across time, human and non-human alike. I'm your host, as always, James W. Jesso, and today's episode is going to feature an interview with Hayden Smith. Carl is Associate Professor of Media at the University of East London. He's also involved with the Museum of Consciousness and the Cyberdelic Society, and he was one of the original participants in the extended state DMT trials that happened at Royal College London. I think Royal College happened at Imperial College London sometime, I believe, last year, 2024. Now, I've known Carl for a little while now. I actually met him back in England in 2016, I believe, and it's been kind of in my mind and on the books, on the table to have him on the show for quite a while. But what sort of had it cross the line to, hey, let's get you in on the podcast, was a chapter that he wrote for a book called Psychedelics and the Coming Singularity. In that chapter, he presents a framework for hyperhumanism, which comes out of this concept or this observation that we as humanity are at a kind of, important inflection point where what we're doing with technology could either help us more deepen more so into the human experience, or it can diminish our humanity as a consequence. So that's generally what Carl's on the show to talk about today: hyperhumanism and the sort of weird tension, the weird place that we're in right now as a species, as a planet, with respect to technology, specifically AI technology. I've written down some of the topics that we discuss here include why AI might not destroy us, but could instead drive us insane, the attention war and technology addiction, digital content's invasion of natural perception, AI, sentience and human identity, and virtual reality, sensory deprivation, and creative engagement, as well as digital resurrection versus authentic grieving. Carl also shares some of his insights from psychedelic research, including being a participant in extended state DMT, and how technology and psychedelics can come together in what he calls Cyberdelics. Additionally, this is not just a totally conceptual conversation. It's also quite practical, and we end up going into discussing what he calls hyperhumanist techniques like peripheral vision exercises and journaling practices that can help you reclaim your attention and deepen your connection to yourself and to the world and to life itself. So this is an episode of Adventures Through the Mind, which means we're going to be going pretty in-depth in the discussion today. And a little piece that I want you to think about is that if you notice that some of the technology we're talking about almost seems out of date, it's because this was recorded 6 months ago, and it's only being released now for reasons that are irrelevant. But if you notice that some of the kinds of technology we're making examples of feels outdated, think about that. Use that as a kind of metric to observe how remarkable the accelerating pace of technological advancement is right now, how quickly that pace is accelerating. That technology that was groundbreaking 6 months ago almost seems outdated, in comparison today. Really wild stuff. So that little caveat in, that little sort of thinking point in, I will not hold you much longer. Here is my interview with Hayden Smith on Adventures Through the Mind, episode 198. Enjoy. Hayden Smith, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind.
Thank you so much, James. It's been a long time coming, but I'm very glad that we're here now.
Yeah, a long time, not only because tech took quite a bit of time to get set up today, and we had to reschedule a couple of times, but also because we actually met a number of years ago, and the idea of an interview was floated then, and it hasn't come to fruition till now. So that's cool that it's come together.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm excited to see what comes out of this.
Yeah, same. What had me sort of get cued to be like, oh yeah, I should invite Carl onto the show is that I read your contribution to it's over there on the other far end of my desk, so I can't pull it up. But it was I believe Psychedelics and the Coming Singularity. You were featured in that collection of essays that was put together by David J. Brown. And I really appreciated the take that you were offering there on what will eventually become the topics of the show. And I wanted to start us off by asking you kind of a big question. I'll call it like a real big apple that I'll give you a chance to take whatever bite out of it you can. And it goes like this. Give me your take on where we're at as a species on planet Earth with respect to our relationship to technology. By this I mean where computer technology fits into our lives, what it has done to us as a species, and the impact both of these factors are having on our relationship to the Earth and the Earth itself, with a particular focus on AI, virtual reality, and social media.
Not a small question to start with, James, but
No.
a great one nevertheless. So yeah, I think where we're at as a species is it's a bit of a disaster, isn't it, in terms of what damage we're doing to every other species. I think if we look to supposedly, humanism putting us as the apex creature, saying that we are the most intelligent, the most worthy of being here. And then we realize that we've destroyed, I think, something ridiculous, like 50% of all other species. And it's not slowing down that destruction. So if we start to look at other queendoms or kingdoms, and there are 5 or 6, depending on who you ask, if we look at the fungi kingdom underneath our feet everywhere we walk, the mycelium, they have this default mode operating system, which is that they share as soon as they're in abundance. And they share with not just their own kind, but with the trees, with the plants, and it's the wood wide web that I think is a very interesting metaphor for where we're going wrong. I think that the human species, the human project has been hijacked by technology to a certain extent. I think that we've designed technology in a way that zombifies us, that makes us more of a virus, primarily because if you're staring at a small bit of real estate, a bit of plastic all day long, you kind of, the world's passing you by. Maybe the one you're meant to be with is just passed you by because you've just been staring at a tiny bit of plastic. So I think, yeah, we need to kind of understand our human condition, and of course understand that we are human by or through technology. And for me, it's very much an opportunity now with AI to redress the balance, because we've all been kind of like living in our heads to a great extent, especially in the West. So how do we actually see AI as an opportunity to become more embodied, to return to the senses, to actually understand that we have maybe 30 senses, not 5? And if you think about virtual reality is a sensory deprivation chamber of mostly vision and sound, but it is sensory deprivation nevertheless. So how do we design our technologies that encompass our full humanity and actually really enable us to be more human, not less? And I think that's the message of hyperhumanism. It's this project that we're in, that we're all part of. We're only really scratching the surface of that human project. And I think we may not really be fully human yet. And we may have hijacked that human project through poorly designed technocentric technologies that have taken us away from ourselves, from each other, and from the natural world.
This is an editorial thing I'll cut, but however you're sitting is causing your camera to move every time you talk. And I'll have to go through I'll have to end up stabilizing it, which might change the video feed.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I may be just hitting it, slightly touching it with my leg.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's weird to try to like. There's a lot of things to think about when you're also just trying to talk about what you're talking about. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments I wanna make to that there, and just to see your feedback. Like one of which is like partially your feedback, but also interesting. This comment you made about virtual reality, you know, the Meta Quest or the Vive or whatever they're called, as being sensory deprivation. But like when I hear sensory deprivation, I think of float tanks, and I think of like, wow, what a beautiful way to use a kind of technology to explore the human condition, which is to like create it's a kind of technology that allows us to go very deep within our sort of interior experience. And yet what you're saying with the virtual reality is this, like, it's a kind of sensory deprivation that's not entire deprivation. It's like we're siloing our sensory experience and then delivering in through that sort of like narrow channel content that directs our experience, rather than opening us up into this like a wide spectrum interiority or interoception, which opens our perception to ourselves, rather than sort of siloing it into this content delivery.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I've done a lot of work with mixed reality and virtual reality. And if we think back to Second Life failed arguably because it was focused only on this kind of siloing. You know, we tried to replicate shopping malls in Second Life, and it was kind of a huge, like, missed opportunity where we think, hang on a minute, is this all we can come up with? We're just going to replicate the real world in the digital world. And of course, there are excellent examples of Cyberdelics that do act like sensory deprivation chambers or float tanks, as you said. But most of them are really kind of not amplifying our senses, or they're not amplifying our imaginations. They are replacing imagination with computer animation. And if we look at McLuhan and hot and cold media, you know, the cold media are the radio shows and the books where you're filling in 70% of that visual with your own imagination, with your own co-creation. Whereas a typical CGI film or a typical VR experience is kind of doing all that for you. So it doesn't really leave open this kind of declarative space. It's very prescriptive. It's very much, this is the path you're going down. And in that sense, you switch off. It's like popcorn, you're just consuming. And so I'm very interested in how do we design these technologies? And I think mixed reality opens us to a new kind of opportunity where, of course, the world is still there. With Second Life, we deleted the world. And I think we delete a lot when we get rid of the world. With virtual reality, it's very hard to design it in a way that is going to totally put you into a transformative we have transcendence and incendence. And incendence is this going into the world. And I've seen excellent examples, you know, even from my co-founder at the Cyberdelic Nexus, Jose's work, where he, with Virtual Awakening, you know, I've seen shaman going into those sort of focused explorations of death, powered by VR, not powered by anything psychedelic, that have led to those shamans, you know, crying, like seeing them come out, needing some sort of integration process to really understand what they've experienced there. So it can be done. And of course, there are great examples, but it's very, very rare. So I think the design of these technologies needs to be very human-centric, not technocentric, and leave room for us to add to those experiences.
Yeah, I think if I'm correct in what I'm hearing you say, you're speaking to, there are technologies that will help, you know, certain aspects of human cognitive potential or human experience, help those aspects flourish and expand and develop, where there are other forms of technology that do it for us to the point that those capacities either don't develop, say when your brain is in its developmental phase and you don't use imagination and you're not bored because you're constantly having entertainment streamed into your brain at all times. Either so we don't develop it or it starts to atrophy. And am I correct that when you use the term cyberdelic just a minute ago, I assume that you're speaking to not only technologies that like help that aspect of human cognition or experience flourish, but also in that flourishing produce like states that would be akin to psychedelic type states, or did I miss something there, or is that what you were speaking to?
Yeah, of course, Cyberdelics is a term that has been around since the 60s, coined by Timothy Leary. So I think Cyberdelics, they do offer other tools in the toolbox, and there are people combining psychedelics with cyberdelics. If you go onto Reddit and you see Rift into the Mind, there's a lot of people combining different medicines with different VR experiences. A lot of people using ketamine, for instance, in combination with VR, because if you preload with something like a dissociative, you're much more likely to believe you're in that game world. So I think that's one of the reasons that people are combining. But I think, yeah, there's we did a big showcase in Melbourne, and it was covered by The Guardian, and everyone was like, this is nothing like psychedelics. And of course, we're not trying to replace psychedelics. I think that we are offering different ways of changing consciousness. And what we're particularly interested in at Cyberdelic Nexus is not just creating altered states, but altered traits. So how do we create lasting change with these technologies? And arguably, we don't change behaviors in a lasting or meaningful way just with one technology. So it's more of what I refer to as Holotechnica. It's this idea of stacking. So holo in the Greek means to combine into the whole, and technica is the technique. So it's all the different techniques. And I think you can see three different examples here. So the endo technologies are those technologies that you have internally, like the breath work, like the meditation, like the hypnosis, all these things that you can do without any external technology. And then you have the traditional medicines, the psychedelics, the entheogens, the dissociatives, etc., representing another group. And then the cyberdelics. And the cyberdelics aren't just VR experiences, they're also sound, flicker lights. So if you imagine a typical Holotechnica stack, and I'm writing a book about this and interviewing various people on what are their protocols for reaching lasting change. And if we look at, there's a book on altered traits, and that book's referring to master meditators that have literally changed their frontal lobes of enlarged by basically spending many years meditating. And I think a lot of people can do these things, but not a lot of people have that time to dedicate to one science, to one technique. So for me, it's really about realizing that everyone's different. It's very hard to scale any psychedelic therapy because everyone brings different traumas, different life worlds to the party. So I think that it's very much something maybe AI can help us with, which is to personalize those stacks, those techniques, in order to optimize for the individual.
Hmm. Yeah. So what you're saying is something like, safety aside, this is just purely hypothetical. Ketamine in the float tank with like a Lucia light integrated into the lid of the float tank as sort of like stacking for these three things or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And not even that. You can imagine the lid of the float tank being your VR headset, right? Instead of having a headset on, the float tank is the VR space. It is the visual space. If you go against the principle that you really shut off that visual process, and that is so much of the brain is the visual processing. So I think that's why I'm focused in on things like sound primarily as a way of changing consciousness with the Museum of Consciousness. It's a project based at Oxford University, because people come to those shows, they experience 5 different transmissions of sound from 5 different artists. we're like cooking with sound. So imagine a recipe where the ingredients are sound, and then it's the stack of those 5 transmissions put in a specific order to transform consciousness. And people are desperate, it seems, for this deep listening that they're not getting. I think listening is a muscle. It's a practice, and there's so little of it happening. Most people are listening to reply. So the opportunity to come to a venue for 5 or 6 hours, we did a massive 6-hour show in New York, in Brooklyn. People told me New Yorkers won't sit still for 20 minutes, especially on a Sunday, but we had 6-hour show, and people love the long form. You know, we talk about ADHD, everyone with ADHD. The reason we have ADHD is because everything's designed for bite-sized transmission. And I think that's part of the problem. We don't have the opportunity to really go into this long form space and this liminal space that it opens up.
Mm. Well, I mean, with some debate to your statement of why we have ADHD being because of technology, I think people who actually have ADHD have it because of a combination of genetic and developmental conditions, but then people who otherwise don't have those genetic predisposition develop the behaviors because of how their brain, how they are training / their brain is being trained to operate based on the way these technologies sort of like guide how the brain, to go back to your reference to Marshall McLuhan, you know, the medium is the message. Like it's not the content that we're consuming matters, but the means, the medium through which that content is coming in, it is a kind of sort of lesson. It's a kind of education on how the brain is supposed to engage reality. And, you know, that from your phone to your next screen to the social media to the short form video and et cetera, trains our brains to be very similar to people who might have ADHD. Attentionally, not necessarily all the other things that come along with a genuine ADHD condition. And I believe that links back to what you said right at the opening, your first bite out of that big apple, was you mentioned that like technology is sort of like we're in a relationship where the technology is changing us. I can't, now it's been several minutes, can't remember the exact language that you use. The way that it had expressed sounded as if like technology sort of had the lead, where, I mean, I'd love to hear you comment a little bit more on how humans are directing technology from this is my sense, a very narrow kind of like window of value of like what is valuable and what values do we want to encase within our technology? What do we want our technology to achieve according to these value structures? And then as that goes along, there's this feedback loop where the technology sort of, you know, reinforces certain ways of thinking, certain values, certain patterns of perception, behavior, and response, that then sort of like cycles and the sort of loop gets tighter as it sort of carries us along. But it's not the technology itself, it's humans getting into this warped relationship with this warped expression of themselves through technology. That's my perspective, and I'm wondering if you agree with that or if you have a different sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only when we're taken away from technology, when we don't have Wi-Fi, that we realize how addicted we are to data. You know, and it seems like it's another stream of information that a lot of us depend on. I've just come back from Egypt, and the internet was so bad that I couldn't upload an image, let alone download a film, etc. So, and it's pretty much widespread across wherever I was, even if I was on Wi-Fi. And I think that is worrying, right? That a lot of us, you know, when I had COVID, I felt as if all I could see was hallucinating was screens. I was just seeing constant screens as if that was all that was in my subconscious. And that was very worrying. So I think it is an attention war. I think a lot of these algorithms, a lot of these giant companies, these, you know, we all know them, that are harvesting our attention, and our attention is linked directly to our consciousness. So unless you maintain mastery over your technology, and I see a large push from, you know, maybe the alphas will undo the damage caused by the Gen Zers to a certain extent. I see a lot of younger people dumbing down their technology, going back to supposedly dumb phones, not having this constant distraction. And I think that there are screensavers now that you can have on your phone that will grow a tree whilst you're not touching your phone. And if you don't touch your phone and a full tree grows, then a real tree is planted. So it's almost like we're children that have to be kind of guided away from technology using technology. I think that there's no real Luddite approach that will say that people, will just en masse leave the technology because we're so enmeshed in it and defined by it. Although one thing that seems to maybe on the cards is that AI will render every image, every sound, and every video on a screen unreliable in terms of its authenticity, and maybe then we will just abandon screens. Maybe that's something that just will happen because people are just so unsure of what reality is, what the media becomes. And I'm now a professor of media in London, and it's an extraordinary time to be focused on media. Media, you could argue, has in some way always been the virus, but now it's much more potent as a mechanism for creating hallucination. And I think that that's the problem with AI, but also maybe one of the benefits is that we will have so much outsourced, so much of our intellectual, our cognitive work will be outsourced to AI that it leaves the body, it leaves the subjective experience, it leaves everything that the AI maybe never will have, never will be. And I think that will be a big celebration again of the felt experience, increasing your sensory apparatus and your range of being in the world.
Hmm. Yeah, it would be great if the sort of the inclinations to rebelliousness of the youth ends up having Gen Alpha rejecting all the BS technologies that us millennials sort of set the stage to be just like indoctrinated or like integrated entirely into their childhoods. And your comment about like attention, you didn't say this word, but like your attention seeds your consciousness, like what you attend to and the quality of attention it asks of you to do so sort of like plants seeds and patterns in sort of what emerges out of consciousness is something I think about regularly. And the way that it sort of generally manifests is there's no phones around, there's no screens around. I'm having a nice conversation with a friend. We're talking about, real stuff. And then for whatever reason, something reminds me of this reel that I just watched. And so then we start talking about our favorite reels. Like I see the world through the associative processes through which I'm sort of like contextualizing my normal, actual, earth, wind, fire, water experience is digital content. Like I see the world through memes and reels, and that freaks me out. It's like the algorithm reaches so far inside of me that it starts coming out of me even when the technology isn't in the room. And I mean, that doesn't stop me from getting caught in the loop of it, but I mean, they are literally designed to be like gambling machines. They're designed to be addictive, like gambling is designed to be addictive, like slot machines. But beyond that, I remember having, not that long ago, having this experience of, I can't remember what it was, but I had just spent like the entire day away from my phone or whatever. And I was like walking through the forest. I was looking at a lot of plants. Oh, I was on a trip with my partner and we did a lot of hiking, not a lot of phone time, a lot of screen time, face to face and nature. And when I laid down in bed at night, the things that were running through my mind were plants. I was seeing plants. I was seeing the patterns that I saw in the plants. I was seeing real stuff and realizing like that's not normally what I think about when I'm living in my sort of regular tech saturated life. And that I felt like that was quite revealing. I mean, again, it doesn't stop me from getting caught in the loops of the thing. But it is concerning. I hold a lot of concern for it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching one of the last TV shows I ever watched was the 10 Reasons Never to Watch TV. And the first one was that the average person watches TV for 4 hours. And likely, I mean, likely on your deathbed, you're going to be not thinking, or your subconscious is again going to be full of the TV characters that you've been watching incessantly for 50 years or whatever, people that watch EastEnders or some of these terrible shows.
Oh, I'm so sad they didn't make a fourth season of Dark Matter. Oh.
So, not to denigrate television, because I think there's a place for it, but it is the opium of the opium of the masses. And but yeah, I've had a life review, which was brought on for unknown reasons. But these life reviews are a known phenomenology where you have your life presented back to you in reverse in these episodic chunks, and you can, you kind of have the overview effect present within those chunks. And the reason why I'm an obsessive journaler is because I want to maximize my day. Nietzsche may be right that amor fati is true, that we don't live have a reincarnation, but we live the same life eternally. The eternal recurrence he refers to it as. And even if that's completely absurd, just on the off chance that it's true, I think that it's absolutely, each day then becomes infinity, right? Each day you would want to live for eternity. So make sure you do what you want to do as if you were doing it forever. And then you would really maybe not watch EastEnders every night.
This is a quote from you. It is not that AI will destroy us, but it will make us insane. Can you explain that a little bit?
So that's not from me. That's from Gerard Larnier. But
pardon me.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I think that what he's referring to there is that there's so much hyperbole around AI at the moment, so much bad reporting designed to put you in a fear state. And of course, there are certain jobs, a lot of jobs that are endangered by this technology. But in terms of sentience, I think this is the truth of it is that it's machine learning that we're dealing with. It's not AI. It's not sentient. It's very unlikely to become sentient from the algorithms that are being propagated. It's language. It's these large language models that are mimicking us very cleverly. They mimic us, but they're working on the basis of all of that stolen culture, whether it's from music, from you name it. It's all been taken from the internet illegally, and it's created this mass hallucination of sentience, of humanity. And that's, I think, what will drive us insane. So it's not so much the actual reality of this technology, it's the perception of it that is being propagated through every dinner party conversation, where we're now questioning what are we then? What is the human if all of this can be done by machines? And I think that means that we have to be very careful about what we ask the machines to do. Do we want the machine to be the poet or the musician or the artist, or do we want to keep those roles for ourselves? There's a great meme that was like, I want the machines to do my washing up while I carry on creating. And of course we can create, and we can massively upscale our visions with these technologies as assistants, but not as the main artist. Or that's the main thing. I think that is the worry, is that we will replace our main, in my opinion, our main reason for being here, which is to create.
Yeah, I actually, I work with AI in my writing, and I don't mean like, Claude, write me a 500 word blog entry, blah blah blah. But it's like, I'll say, like, I'll see the prompt, like, I'm working on, these are the topics, this is what I'm working on, and then I'll say, I'm looking for a word that fits in this sentence that isn't this word, but represents the larger topics that I'm discussing in an accurate way. Can you give me a suggestion of these words, what they mean, and why you feel like they would fit in that? So it's kind of just like a conversation that I have with a highly versed interactive thesaurus. Excellent way to use this tool.
Absolutely.
And yet simultaneously, I know that similar technology is being used to be like, plug and play, here's a prompt, now make me a 3-minute YouTube video or a 60-second reel that will trick a lot of people into thinking it's delivering high quality information. Especially, I would say, I see it in like health products and like marketing to wellness supplements and so on and so forth. So, anyways, that's a reaction to a very small piece of what you said. On a larger end, there's this question of who are we? Like, what is this humanness that is us, right? And this actually brings me to the next question that I have, which is, earlier you used the term hyperhumanism, and it's a topic that you often talk about. And so I'm curious if you could tell me about hyperhumanism and how it compares and contrasts to where we're presently at with respect to our sense of humanness in a technological context.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think the key thing that I reference with hyperhumanism is this idea that we are channels. We are receiving messages, signals, whatever you want to call it, from somewhere. In the same sense that I fully believe that consciousness is not being produced by our brains. I think our brains are being produced by consciousness. I see consciousness as primary, and I think that we are divine. I think that we have these vessels, these bodies that are not ours, that none of it's ours. We live for 1,000 months, and we think we're immortal. We think we own things. We think we own the land, but we are ephemeral beings passing through. And if we give up our divinity, if we stop, if we outsource everything, like the Transhuman project seems to be advocating for, then we risk atrophying that muscle that is that channel. And I think that a lot of my work is about keeping that channel open, clearing the channel, and honoring the signal. So that's something that the AI will never have. We are creating these technologies. They are just the latest disruptive technologies. And of course, we are transhuman now. We are transhuman now. If we have a telephone, most of us do. If you smash the screen on your phone, it's like having locked-in syndrome. Suddenly, you feel like your consciousness is locked into that bit of plastic, and you can't function. So, transhumanism's here. Hyperhumanism is the North Star. That is an intergenerational project. That is something to work towards. I believe that we are not human yet. I think that we've atrophied our humanity through these transhuman technologies. And if we continue down this path of getting rid of the distance between what we think or what we desire and actually having it, it's the one button solution to everything. Get me a girlfriend, get me a job, get me a holiday. It's almost like we need to build friction back in. So unlike the Neuralink, which is to remove all distance, I believe that we need to go the other way. We need to make sure that we are creating friction, that we have to understand that pain and suffering is required for growth and for inspiration. And I see groups called, there's something called paradise engineering, which is only wanting to narrow that human dynamic range to just pleasure. But I think our capacity to feel pleasure is narrow for a reason, because it gets us very little in terms of growth and in terms of transcendence. So it's only when you go through a dark night of the soul that you kind of really feel rebirth. So hyperhumanism is very much the fork in the road. I think that there's a desperate need. People feel like transhumanism is inevitable, and of course it's already here. But how far do we want to go? I think if we think about language itself is a technology built on top of probably telepathy. We had grunting after telepathy, then we had language, then we have this kind of metaverse, which is this virtual layer where we all have digital twins, we all have social profiles. A lot of people do anyway. And we're feeding that digital twin. We're creating the best version of ourselves to put on display, to say, this is my life. And of course, it's not your life. It's a very curated, ill-fated illusion that most people think is real, or most people like base their conceptions on of you. And I think that it's not the authentic self. And these are layers and layers of abstraction upon reality that are distances. They are distancing us from our source. And I think that hyperhumanism and the techniques involved in hyperhumanism represent a resistance to this fake reality that is being propagated.
Yeah, your last comment there around like this sort of selective curation of the person, which is of the person's digital representation. I just think about how much harm this does, like to the individual, maybe, unless they actually are fantastically successful and happy and don't have any negative things to show. But this also in the individual receiving and consuming that content. If it wasn't for the unrealistic standards or the unrealistic expectations for happiness and so-called beauty that these technologies tend to propagate in people, we wouldn't be seeing like a lot of people feeling like quite depressed about their lives because everybody else seems to be living such a better life than them. And I mean, I know that it's not reasonable for make these hard line conclusions that it's going to sound like I'm making, but it would appear as though like the rampant increase in suicides among like young teenage girls especially seems to be directly associated with their consumption of social media and how they feel about themselves as a consequence. So it's so interesting how much our like desire to make things, like to create this world where everything is immediately available to us and everything is positive and everything is pleasure and everything is so on and so forth, just increasingly generates more damage, harm, suffering, pain, challenge in ways that don't stimulate growth and maturity in all edges outside of that narrow window, the engineered paradise that you were kind of talking to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're at the mercy of this mass soothing. Everything's designed to soothe us, not really to heal us in any real sense, but just to soothe and to give us this kind of very shallow relief from our reality. And I think if we look at examples like the trend to digitally resurrect our loved ones that have passed.
Oh, this
again,
is so weird.
And yeah. It's something very transhuman, very, in my opinion, the absolute opposite of where we want to be going, because it's a denigration of those loved ones. Again, it's the mimicry of them, it's the mockery of them. And I know Ray Kurzweil spent millions on trying to resurrect his dad who passed before all of this technology was available, and that for me is a symptom of not living. We're not living if we're trying to resurrect somebody that maybe we didn't spend enough time with at the time of their living. That they are having to be brought back from the dead. And it was brilliant to see, like, I think Marlon Brando, when he passed, he said, I want to be brought back, as a hologram. I want to be reanimated. Whereas Robin Williams, when he passed from suicide, he specifically wrote in his will he would not want to be resurrected digitally. So it's almost as if, and you've got that button on, I believe, on Facebook or certain social medias where it's to delete all data upon death. So yeah, I think that there's certain traits and certain things that we're seeing where we realize we are becoming media. When your voice can be taken, and if you have a public persona like you do yourself, James, you're fair game. People can turn you into whatever they want because they can get your voice. They can have you saying whatever the hell they want. So it's very tricky to navigate this new space of ontological design, where the mantra is design or be designed. So context engineering is here. It's about what you do with it. You either take a hyperhuman approach and use technologies in a hyperhumane way, because it's really about being humane to yourself and to your fellow humans and to all the other queendoms that exist with and without us. People talk as if we are humans alone, but you are half of you's bacteria and you're covered in fungi. So you're already three queendoms or kingdoms, and you're a nested ecology. So just having that awareness of what you are when you've been lied to so much through these giant mirrors, and I think that it's about being humane to those loved ones that have passed, and not trying and actually open the channels to have them talk to you in dreams, which is what I did when I lost my mum 6 months ago. I decided to be completely sober in order to have as much access to my dreaming, because I find it interesting that if you are to take medicines of any description, that they tend to atrophy your ability to connect in that channel opening that is the dream world. And I waited patiently for her to communicate with me. I mean, I was in Berlin when it happened, and I was around people that were like, "I've got a Ouija board. Do you want to talk to your mum?" I'm like, "Of course not. Like, I wouldn't dare interrupt that massive expansion of consciousness that's occurring within her life world. I would, it's rude to try and interrupt, and it's also like, we are the ones left behind, but we have to sit in that. We have to sit through that, and it's the biggest initiation of all.
Hmm. And like I can appreciate strongly why someone would want to recreate their dead loved one to interact with them. Like I get that. And I think about the people who I deeply love and they're dying, the sort of desperation. Like there's other aspects to it, but one of the aspects is this desperation of like they'll be gone. I'll never be able to see them again. Sure, like maybe in dreams, and they'll always be alive in my heart, and so on and so forth. But like I'll never be able to hold their hand. I'll never be able to sort of like tell them about my day and physically hear their voice, the sound of their voice, or like the holding of their arms or whatever. And the idea that I could get some sort of facsimile, but some sort of something of that, if I'm really deeply sort of stuck in that grief, like I could appreciate wanting to move towards it, right? And at the same time, it does feel like really weird to then like actualize from that desire to try to make it happen through digital technologies. I'm sort of reiterating a thing I just said I did do earlier, which is weird that a conversation leads me to start bringing up reels. But one I saw multiple times was this clip of this woman seeing her dead daughter in VR. I don't know if you've seen this, and it's like it's very like the sort of digital rendering is very like it's very obviously digital, and she's like interacting with like haptic gloves and this thing to like touch her daughter, saying like I don't know, like a child, like mommy, I love you, and she's just like crying, and she's like, oh, my little girl, I miss you so much, and my heart is breaking. I'm watching this and my heart is breaking for this mother, because I can, as a human, I empathize, like just the grief there and the sadness and like the kind of sort of what is being touched, that she's having this opportunity. I can really relate to that. And there's another part of me that I'm like, I'm so fucking uncomfortable because this feels so wrong at the same time. Like it's maybe not intentionally malevolent, but there's something gross and almost like defiling of the dead to do something like this. So it's, I mean, maybe I like, thank you for doing therapy with me here today, Carl, on this particular topic, but it is, you bringing it up, it really sort of strikes this, like, what are we doing? What is our technology calling out of us? What is it suppressing, and what is it encouraging? And this leads me to my next question, which is, you mentioned, it's not all bad, like AI tech. I mean, maybe if we do get to AGI and ASI tech, hopefully it won't be Skynet, but like, if we do get there, whatever, but maybe this machine learning that we call AI tech could really support a hyperhumanist approach to life. And I'm curious where you see these types of things happening. Like, do you have any specific examples of where, or at least how, the sort of our incredible developments of technology could be used to support hyperhumanism?
Yeah, I mean, one example, I don't know whether you've seen this, earthspecies.org. So check out earthspecies.org. So that's a lot of machine learning being used to open up the languages of these other queendoms or kingdoms. So there's projects looking at sperm whales where they've
Oh,
now
I have heard
found,
of this.
yeah,
Incredible. Yeah.
so sperm whales have their own phonetic alphabet. We know every elephant names has a name. We know every bird names its young. So there is a huge thing there where my take on hyperhumanism or hyperhumanism is it's a bridge to interbeing. It's a bridge to understanding that we are not alone, that most people don't even realize that when you pick plants, they squeal, right? There's whole research into that. So even vegans are causing harm, right? So there's no way you can exist on this planet without causing some sort of harm to survive, unless you're a breatharian. And
Well,
of
then you're
course,
harming yourself, and you live for what, 45 days, maybe 50 tops.
well, so I think that is a huge thing for us to open up these frontiers, whether it's morally correct to start communicating with these other queendoms or kingdoms is a great question. I think that language, as I've talked about, is a great distancer to a certain extent, but we see language in these other species, and we now have the opportunity with these disruptive technologies to open that dialogue. And we may not like what we hear, very likely that we do, but of course there are great things that we're doing as well in restoring nature, in planting trees. So if we were to open a dialogue with a forest, what's it like to be a forest? What's it like to be the land? And also, why are we so human centric in our creativity? So I know people that are making music for cats, or they're making music for mushrooms. And I know there's one of my friends, Gus. He really is an expert in plant signaling, and he sees so many people faking it. So there's a big sort of jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, we're making mushroom music today, and they're just attaching these these electrodes to the mycelium, but it's not actually picking up anything to do with the mycelium's music, etc. It's just the interference patterns that you're hearing. So, but there are people really doing this, and I think if we start to open up and start to listen to music made by mushrooms, and of course it doesn't sound very good according to us, but the music, according to the other fungi, they're probably loving it. So it's about this. For me, it's about opening up this sense of interbeing, that we are enmeshed in this incredible world, and we know very little of it. I just read today about they've just discovered this ginormous coral reef in the Atlantic. We don't know what's under the sea. It's like a total unknown to us, and yet we're trying to get to Mars when we haven't really scratched the surface of what's already here.
Sure.
So
Or permanently, permanently destroy what's under the oceans to get more metals to make more electric cars,
exactly.
rather than perhaps making better public transit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where I'm at with it. I think that obviously I mentioned before, I think it will free up so much of our subjective experience, so much of our even, again, not saying this is good, but now we will have the ability to communicate to languages we've never had the opportunity to communicate to those language bases. And I think the danger is that if you are bilingual, you're much more likely to survive a stroke, because you've got more neural matter in your brain. So it shouldn't atrophy our ability to learn languages. It should maybe speed up the process. Maybe we can learn Russian or Japanese much more quickly if we're using these tools, but we should still learn those languages.
Yeah. Cool. We don't want the universal translator, Star Trek-esque universal translator, so much as maybe um, some sort of like a Babelfish assist. It doesn't give you the language for you, but it helps progressively correct what you're getting wrong, so that there's like an immediate feedback loop for learning to happen rather than just the absorption of content. Your comment about the mushroom music doesn't sound good to us, ran through the sort of classic example of the older generation going, well, that's not music, that's noise. Turn off that noise. The mushrooms are like, but we're vibing over here. Conciliating, yo. Get with the web. Anyway, so I want to take a little pause here in the interview, and I want to thank my patrons on Patreon. Without their contributions to the show, without their financial contribution to the production of the show and the larger body of my work that supports it, I would not be able to literally and figuratively keep the lights on here. This is my job. This is what I've been working on, training in, and developing for the last 10 years of my life. This is how I earn an income. This is how I earn a living. My patrons make that possible, and I could not be more grateful. Thank you very much. The people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube give $23 or more, some of which for a long time, and their name on the screen on YouTube or in the description of this episode, wherever you're checking out, is an extra special thanks for that. If you're not yet a patron of the show, you're finding value in the show, I invite you to please become a patron on Patreon. Even something as little as $2 to $4 a month really does make a big difference. I know that the world is a complex economic place right now, so I can appreciate not having that around. But if you do, please do consider contributing to it in the form of some sort of financial contribution to the production of the show, be it through Patreon or through a one-time donation, if you want to just toss me a little tip for what you perceive as a job well done. That's through PayPal. That's linked in the description, just like Patreon. And there are other options. All that's going to be linked there. If you don't have any financial means right now, you could always send me a little thanks. You could give me a like or a heart or a double tap or a comment on Spotify or elsewhere, subscribe, reviews. There's all sorts of non-financial ways you can help support the show. Small team, literally one-man operation, that man being me. So any contribution you do into sort of helping put it to the front stage of the algorithm for others would be helpful, because we don't have a team to do that for us. Unlike many of the other bigger podcasts. So thank you very much for that. And here we go back into the interview with Carl Hayden Smith. Now, technology such as digital technologies, electronic technologies, not the only technologies available to do this, to take a hyperhumanist, sort of develop our hyperhumanism. Psychedelics can fit into that, but I don't want to ask you about psychedelics yet. I want to hear, what are some of the other practices that somebody, say, who doesn't have a Quest, a Quest 3S or whatever on board, and doesn't have access to these technologies. What are some sort of at home, I could start today kinds of technologies that people could use to start cultivating a hyperhumanist approach to life?
Yeah, I think one thing you could do right now, if you're even just listening to this podcast or watching it, is to practice your peripheral vision. So peripheral vision is about defocusing, not looking straight ahead of you, which we all do with these tiny little bits of real estate, which are our phones. So just defocus and look into your whole 180-degree view as one image. And you'll notice within 30 seconds, a minute, that your whole physiology starts to calm down. So athletes do this before a big race. I do it before a big talk. And it's almost immediate in terms of its ability to connect you to your physiology. That would be one, I would say. And there's many ways of many different types of peripheral vision exercise. I mean, during the pandemic, we lost optic flow. So this turned us all into goldfish, right? So if you're sitting in a room and things are not passing you by, you're not seeing things pass you by in your peripheral, that's a loss of optic flow. So, when you don't have optic flow, then you tend to atrophy your creativity, your thinking, which is much like when we're sitting in front of screens all the time. We don't have movement. We start to die. Figuratively and creatively, we're kind of dying on the vine. So I think understanding the relationship between movement and creativity. We haven't got onto psychedelics yet, but movement and psychedelics, doing a psychedelic in a movement, being in nature, I think is hugely beneficial rather than just sitting in a club. If the context is king, so 80% of the medicine is the context, which is why I think that so much of our psychedelic data so far is warped, because a lot of those clinical trials have happened in hospitals, which we associate with death and dying. But yeah,
and sickness,
and sickness. So I think psychogeography is another really interesting hyperhuman kind of practice. And you'll notice as you're kind of walking down the street, you want to be on one side of the street, not the other. And you're sort of sensing, in some sense, that that's a better route, even though it's the same street. You want to walk down one side of the street than the other. Astral bathing, I think, just being, aware that we are on a spaceship flying through space, getting to grips with that rather than being locked into this kind of very scientific materialist worldview. I mean, I was just out in Egypt and in the middle of the desert in Egypt, looking at the comet going past, and just coming across like human remains. There's mummies just all over the desert. Just insane. So being in touch with the stars whilst also being in touch with the ancient past. I'm realizing that you will soon be in the dust, and just relishing your human subjective experience and not whiling your whole life away on Netflix, which you can easily do. I mean, I think that it's about breath work, it's about meditation, it's about all those endotechnologies, and then experimenting, trying to reach types of consciousness that you've never reached before, that maybe nobody's reached before. And also journaling. I mentioned journaling. My big love is to have this superpower where I can jump out of point of view and go into field of view. The overview effect is accessible in many different senses, whether it's through medicines, whether it's through doing different breath works. But journaling gives me this ability, because I've got a trace through time of what I've done. And I've been writing my journal for 30 years. And I've written it every day. So I write it from three sort of semantic levels: content, what I did; context, what I felt; and concepts, what I thought. So key thinking. So I've got this whole data set, ironically, which is perfect to make an AI version of myself, which I never will, because I've got the thinking, feeling, and doing. And it's multimodal. So I capture my concepts, my ideation is all handwritten in notebooks, because there's something about writing by hand, which is very hyperhuman, which not many people do anymore, which means you're much more likely to remember it. You're imprinting those ideas. My content, what I've done, is all written in digital. It's all just a 2 million word long document that I can't even open. I have to break it up into parts to be able to access it. And then the context is captured through video, through photographs. So I've got this entire archive, which enables me to see a relationship that I may have been in for a year, and I can read that entire relationship in an afternoon, say 50, 60 pages, whatever it is. So I'm able to turn that relationship into a bird's eye view, into an image that I can scour and interrogate and be a detective upon, because we can gain wisdom when we have these overviews, when we have these larger views over our life world. And I can also take cross sections through this 30 years. So I can look at this day last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. I get 30 different me's communicating again. And with the way I construct the diary is that it reconstructs the days around it, and it kind of forces me to live. So I have to have new material every day. going back to Nietzsche's idea of amor fati, love your fate, maximize your day, get as much out of it. If it's true, and what I saw in the life review was that you get your life world back as a product, and you can only really access what you've done after the curtain goes down. It's what you've done, it's who you've met, it's who you've been to, that you get to explore in depth without time. So for me, the hyperhuman thing is to really live as much of a rich life that helps others, that helps the world, that gives hope to others. Lead by example, I think, is the critical thing, and make sure that you are trying to umwelt hack. Umwelt hacking is another hyperhuman technique, which is this idea that we've actually built these prosthetics that are very low tech, that you can wear, that enable you to become a tree or enable you to become an octopus. So just trying to use your imagination as a muscle, and really go into these sort of cold medias in order to really become more human. It's as simple as that.
I assume that my assumption, because I know it kind of came up for me, was a combination, when you're talking about your journaling practice, a combination of like, wow, that would be so great, and wow, that sounds like a lot of work. And I imagine that it isn't, because it's like integrated into you. But I also imagine that someone can get the sort of hyperhumanism benefits of journaling by just journaling however they intuitively feel called to journal, without having to do it from a particularly structured place. So journaling itself can be one of those technologies. It doesn't have to be, structured in a particular way. And with the sort of limited time we have left here, I do want to get into psychedelics. I have two primary questions, one of which will bring us into your experiences as a participant in the extended state DMT trials. That's the second / last big question. The first one is, where do you see psychedelics fitting into hyperhumanism, in our cultivation of it as a path in our relationship to technology, and maybe add as the GABA to that glutamate, where we're not using them, where we're actually using them in a way that compromises that direction. And you've already spoken to it a little bit, but this is more like an opportunity to really go at it.
Sure. So I think the key thing is the transhuman versus hyperhuman way of using psychedelics. If we look at DMT extended, it's a fascinating technology, right? So we know that there is very little tolerance with DMT. You can have a continuous infusion and potentially be kept in hyperspace indefinitely. Is that appropriate for the human project? I don't think so. I think that if you are wanting to be a post-biological DMT elf, then sure enough, fill your boots. But for me, it's very much the transhuman route, right? Being kept in a vat and having waste management taken care of, with food coming through a straw. I'm working with Andrew Gallimore, and Andrew is very keen for this vision. But for me, it's like we have a huge opportunity to extend the state, maybe for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on what you're trying to find. I think we've seen studies recently where 6 hours have been administered of DMTX for low dose stroke victims. So very low dose, to see if it helps with the recovery. I think that there's super research coming out. Eddie Fresca's work, where he's looking at DMT to help people that have had a stroke or a heart attack, and to get them to buy them time whilst in the ambulance, to get them to the ambulance in one piece. So I think that there are extraordinary hyperhuman benefits to these psychedelics, especially things like DMT and 5-MeO DMT. I've just come out of the 5-MeO DMT at Imperial, where I was given Beckley Cytex nasal spray, and I was in the peak of that 5-MeO experience for over an hour.
Wow.
And it's almost like DMT, 5-MeO DMTX. And depending on how much of a psychonaut you are, how much of because it's an extreme sport, DMTX and 5-MeO DMTX, these things are not for the masses. I don't think. I think that they are always going to be kind of, it's a mystery school. I think it's a modern day mystery school. And if we look at the mystery schools of Alephsis in the ancient Greek world, again, these were for people that had done the emotional resilience, had gone through the dark night of the soul, that had written those philosophical texts. All the Greek philosophers went through those mystery schools, those 3-day initiatory rites. And it's not about how much money you've got. It's very much about what you've done, what work you've done, what inner work you've done, how much you've integrated the shadow, and also not abusing the amount of time we spend in there. When I first went and had my brain scanned at Imperial, whilst being injected with DMT at the same time, the amount of the biggest shock to me was the amount of entities that arrived en masse, all very concerned for me. Showed me I'm immortal in this like white flash, added ticker tape for effect to make sure I didn't forget what was going on. But there were just all this variety of concern and this benevolence. And can we do anything to help you? And I had to explain, I'm in a DMT research study. I know you're the ones that are normally scanning me, but I'm actually here being scanned in London. Calm down. I had to calm down the entities, which is a massive role reversal, and something that really made me very acutely aware of the benevolence. And then 2 weeks later, I had to go back in, even though I was kind of warned not to. I went back in and I was in exactly the same landscape, this holographic world, but no entities came, as if to say there is that intelligence, as if to say, we told you so. Like, what are you doing back? We're not even going to bother coming back to tell you. So I think ayahuasca, DMT, all of these substances, we seem to, and we're studying it, the endogenous release of DMT. We know that there's a whole cocktail of drugs that are released at death. So if DMT is involved with your passover into the next realm, then be mindful that you don't cry wolf by doing it so often here. I think we're constantly trying to peek beyond the veil, whilst what we should be doing is having this luxurious, in some sense, or rather very rare human experience, not spending our entire lives trying to outsource that death experience that's coming anyway. Let's not spend all of our time peeking beyond the veil when that's inevitable. Maybe the void, the full void of the 5-MeO experience is death. And I've known there's been many people that have done 5-MeO DMT 8 times a day for months on end, and then just killed themselves at the end because they think that is death. That's a huge
believe
leap.
I know who you're
Yeah.
speaking to, actually, who is also a friend of mine.
Yeah. So a huge leap of faith. Maybe it is just a blackout. Maybe it is the end. I don't think so, but we all have our opinions. But let's use these technologies, these psychedelics, in a hyperhumane way that's respectful of our place on Earth, and that doesn't lead to widespread zombification, but in a different realm. And I think that we also need to ask permission to go to these realms. Maybe we're not welcome if we plug in, because it is a form of electricity. It's like plugging into the mainframe, and suddenly we're colonizing these other realms that are not ours, and it could form another form of colonization. So I think it's this huge opportunity, as are all psychedelics. But for me, it's about going in there for a few hours, inviting out the elders to try this technology, to get their approval, because I think a lot of the time we are extractive. In the West, we from coca leaves we make cocaine and crack. From iboga we make ibogaine. From DMT we now have DMTX, from the ayahuasca vine to DMTX. And I know that Chris Timmerman and Anton went to Colombia, sat with a shaman, and did ayahuasca, and then brought that same shaman back to London to do DMTX. And I think that's progressive. That's what we need to be looking at. So let's make sure that we do not offend, anyone on this side of the coin or the other side of the coin. And let's just try and go in there with intention. Let's try and go in there with scientific problems to solve. And of course, it's even though I've been through a lot of these studies, I'm still very much on the fence as to whether you are experiencing a parallel reality with these entities as sentient others, or whether it's just your own archetypes and your own imagination. In my world, it doesn't really matter if it's one or the other. If it's just my own reality, my own make believe, then wow, what an amazing imagination I have.
And I mean, there's lots I could say to what you said there, but just on that last point is like, well, I mean, as long as you don't go overboard, it's probably, serves you more to at least assume that perhaps it is the case that you are not the center of the universe and are actually a part of a larger ecology of beings that are both, physically manifest in the sort of corporeal realm and perhaps manifest in other realms that we don't normally experience with our physical senses, that, it could benefit us to conduct ourselves accordingly, as long as we don't, maybe go a little too far out with how we let it play out in our behaviors and interactions with others. So, I mean, that was great. Discussion on sort of like the larger sort of arc, specifically leaning in towards the exploration of these sort of more intense psychedelics such as DMT and 5-MeO DMT in extended state. What about, okay, so you kind of gave the general, it's a hyperhuman versus transhumanism kind of approach to things. Well, I'm wondering with respect to, okay, depending on when someone's listening to this, if it's within the next 5 years, I assume they don't have access to extended state DMT at home. That's a conservative guess, 5 years. That they, if they have access to something, it's going to be a little bit more run of the mill. And of course, this podcast never encourages people to take psychedelics. It's not about that. But if someone is consuming psychedelics and they think, okay, well, I want to explore my why. You said, 80% of the medicine is context. I want to explore that, that internal context, the sort of mindset context, the why, and the from what reasoning and from what sort of like perceptual models for life. Am I approaching and working with this substance? What might be some perspectives you would offer them with respect to showing up to their psychedelic experience from a why perspective and a what perspective, and maybe in contrast to what you see as maybe more transhumanist, less hyperhumanist way of approaching psychedelics?
Well, I mean, we all see this trend of people using vape pens on the dance floor. And I was at a Zora festival, during the recent gathering in Hungary, and you smell DMT everywhere on the dance floor. And for me, it's each person to their own. But I think it's something sacred. I think it's something that you should be very mindful of the context that you're taking it within. I think now we're seeing the rise of 5-MeO DMT vape pens. And I think if you are talking about the why of why you're going into these spaces, I think that these are the ultimate kind of technologies. They are invitations to connect to as you mentioned, this network of being that isn't you necessarily. So be mindful of that. Be mindful of the fact that you are entering spaces that may be not yours, that maybe need some reverence and should be taken as such. So do not necessarily do these things in party settings. Do not do them without a dieter. Go in there with the best body set, not just the mindset, not just the best context, but also go in there with your best health. Make sure that you're well rested. Don't do any of this stuff if you're not on the best form. But then I say that if there are people that have cancers and then they do Cambo, I know Cambo can be very good to reset your immune system. Maybe it doesn't last that long, but again, have reverence for the being that is giving you that bridge to healing. Be mindful that in the same way with the AI technologies, it all depends what you're feeding it, right? It all depends. If you're working with an AI that's built on the wisdom traditions, then you're going to get a very different kind of response in that mirroring than you are if you're working with open AI. And so I think, yeah, be mindful of what you're feeding that space. It's a bi-directional communication.
Hmm. And I think part of that mindfulness, I suppose, is also sort of like looking at the larger context and how you approach it. You said like go in with like in your best state, your healthiness or whatever. Well, someone's best state looks different. It looks different if you have cancer than if you are, like 25 years old in the prime of your life,
Of course.
And also I think, it's fair to say that I assume most people that are just like hitting the DMT pen on the dance floor at a Psytrance festival, as epically amazing a Psytrance festival as Azora is, especially on Sangoma night, which is like my getting the dark side is where I like to go. But I could see that, like generally that's probably just because like, fuck yeah, let's bring it up another level. Like this whole music and this whole environment is made to kind of be like we're high on drugs. Let's also be high on drugs. And then there's another layer of that, which is, I think it's unfair to assume that it's not sacred for someone, because I also have met many people who, their pilgrimage is to the big Psytrance festival. Their sort of sacred moment is all night on the dance floor at a Psytrance festival. And I think it's also, it's not unreasonable to me to think that their sort of consumption of the DMT pen is in service to that sacredness, and maybe very intentionally, but also it could be just flippant entertainment as well. So I think it really comes down to not so much a prescription of the sort of step-by-step, the hows and whys that I hear you speaking to, but a kind of description of the kind of mindfulness and consideration you can bring to those choices, which can be an inclination towards a hyperhumanist approach and simultaneously an expression of it, if I've got that correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a personal choice. Like you say, there are pilgrims, there are people that are taking these things as sacraments, even in that context. And each to their own, as I mentioned. I think that it's, for me, I wouldn't do it mainly because Psytrance, I mean, the direction of Psytrance I'm seeing is this high tech. And when I was towards the end of the evening, at both Modem and Azora, you're hearing kind of 250 beats a minute, and it just, to me, sounds like gunfire. It just sounds like, and the drug most used is probably ketamine, and it doesn't strike me that these people are even enjoying what they're listening to. They're just getting through it with in a disassociated state. But I am certainly not judging anyone's choice of practice or music. It's just, I was there with David Glowacki, and he was serenading me with Icaros in my tent in the morning to try and undo some of the damage that we both experienced by listening to this high tech all night. And there was no break in the music. So, each to their own.
I mean, also high tech is, man, holy goodness. It seems like it's only really enjoyable if you let yourself be in the absolute middle of it, and give yourself over to it. But it is very intense. Not my entire cup of tea. Again, more of a dark sci kind of guy. Dark sci, forest, depending on the time of night, can get down with that. Anyways, that's a totally different conversation. You just got me excited on a tangent thing, which is psytrance music, which I love. But yeah, beautiful perspectives, Carl. I've really appreciated having you on the show. It's unfortunate it took so long to come together, but given how the conversation went, it sounds like it's great that we waited, in the sense that this is the thing that came out of it. For the listeners, if they're interested in following up or following more of what you do, I mean, of course, we both shared some, I think, fair critique of social media. Of course, social media technologies do serve a function, sometimes a very generative one, and one of which is to stay up to date with people who you don't know in your personal life, or maybe you do, and the work that they're producing. With that respect, or in respect to that, where can people follow you on social media or stay up to date with what you're doing in the world?
So the main projects I would say would be the anchors. So the Museum of Consciousness is the moc.org. Then you've got Cyberdelic Nexus. So check out Cyberdelic Nexus. Then you also have a book that's coming out on Holotechnica and a book that's coming out on hyperhumanism. There's loads and loads of talks that you can find on any of those subjects by just Googling my name with those keywords. And in terms of social media, I'm on Instagram as DJ Interbeing and on Facebook as Carl Hayden Smith.
Carl Hayden Smith, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, James. It's been great.
And cut. Okay, thank you so much for tuning into this interview. You've been listening to episode 198 with Carl Hayden Smith here on Adventures Through the Mind. If you like what you heard there from Carl, please consider checking him out through the links that he had mentioned, all the contact stuff that he mentioned there at the end. I'll make sure that's in the description to this episode or in the show notes of this episode at jameswjesso.com. There might be a couple of other interestingly new things, being that it was 6 months since this was recorded. And so Carl might have some more things to share, but I didn't hear from him before I had to record this outro. So if you look into the description to this, there might be a couple of surprises of some fun and interesting things that Carl is up to now. So please do that. Do that. If you're interested in staying up to date with what I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram at ATTMind podcast, at my podcast. You could follow me on Substack, or you can follow me on Blue Sky or Telegram, or through my email newsletter, One Person Operation. And those are all the ways that I stay connected with people. Subscribing to the show, of course, is great. And links to everything will be in the description to this episode. And I thank you so much for tuning in. These are long, in-depth conversations, and they aren't usually, for most people, from what I've been told, sort of like passive recreational enjoyment, which means that if you made it all the way to the end, either you totally vibe on passively recreating with this podcast, which fucking 2 thumbs up, thank you, or you took the time to really put your attention to this. Either way, you chose to let me and things that I care about and things that I found interesting into your world in a way that hopefully you also found interesting. And that is an opportunity, that is a privilege that I don't take for granted. So thank you very much for that. And that's all. The weather is beautiful. I'm recording this the day before the summer solstice. The light will not get much brighter this season than it will over the next couple of days. And then we slowly, sometimes kicking and screaming, drag our way back down into the dark here in North America, Canada, where I'm at. So I hope that wherever you are, you're enjoying sunshine. If you're south, maybe you're enjoying the winter. Good luck. And that's all. I've been your host, James Jesso, and until the next episode of Adventures to the Mind, take care and stay curious.